The desert wind carried the scent of cordite and death across the Syrian wasteland. Captain Victoria Kincaid lay motionless on the rocky outcrop, her body pressed against stone that still radiated heat from the afternoon sun. 2,387 yards downrange, an ISIS commander stepped out of a concrete bunker, satellite phone pressed to his ear. Victoria's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped from 60 beats per minute to 42. The Schmidt and Bender scope revealed every detail of the target's face, the slight movement of his lips as he spoke, the way his left hand gestured while he talked. The wind pushed against her exposed skin, 12 miles per hour from the southwest, gusting to 15. She made the calculations automatically. Elevation compensation for the extreme range, windage adjustment for the crosswind, the Coriolis effect at this latitude, the spin drift of the .338 Lapua Magnum round. Her right hand moved the turret with mechanical precision. 3.4 mils elevation, 1.8 mils windage. The target shifted position. Victoria adjusted. Her finger rested on the trigger, applying 3.5 pounds of pressure to the 5-pound brake. The world narrowed to the crosshairs, the target's center mass, the rhythm of her own breath. She exhaled halfway and held it. The rifle spoke once. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, familiar as a handshake. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's impact. The ISIS commander's head snapped backward, his body crumpled. The satellite phone clattered against concrete. Victoria worked the bolt, chambering another round, but the compound remained still. No movement, no response, just the wind and the distant sound of the phone ringing, unanswered on the ground beside a dead man. She keyed her radio. Overwatch to command, target eliminated, packages cold. The voice that came back was gravelly, worn smooth by 4 decades of cigarettes and classified operations. Colonel Jameson Hargrove, call sign Ghost, her handler and mentor for the past 5 years. Confirmed Overwatch, extract in 15, helo inbound your position. Victoria began breaking down her hide site. She moved with practiced efficiency, erasing every trace of her presence. The rocks she'd used for support went back to their original positions. The depression where her body had lain was smoothed over. In 3 minutes, no one would know she'd been there at all. The Black Hawk appeared over the ridgeline right on schedule. Victoria moved to the landing zone, her rifle case secured across her back, her body already transitioning from the stillness of the sniper to the alertness of extraction. The crew chief helped her aboard without a word. The helicopter lifted, banking hard toward the Turkish border. She didn't look back at the compound. Didn't need to. The shot was perfect. It always was. What Victoria didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the man she just killed was more than an ISIS commander. He was also a business partner, a facilitator, a linchpin in a weapons trafficking network that stretched from the battlefields of Syria all the way back to the United States Marine Corps. And the man who'd lost his partner that day would remember her face, would learn her name, would wait 4 months for the perfect moment to make her pay for what she'd taken from him. But that would come later. For now, Victoria Kincaid was just another operator completing another mission in a war that had no end in sight. 4 months later, the heat was different. Not the dry furnace blast of the Syrian desert, but the humid thickness of coastal North Carolina in late summer. Camp Lejeune sprawled across 156 square miles of pine forest and salt marsh, home to 40,000 Marines and sailors. The base had been training warriors since 1941, and every building, every road, every training ground carried the weight of that history. Victoria sat alone in the corner of the main mess hall, a technical manual open in front of her. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray shirt, running shoes that looked casual but were designed for quick movement. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would draw attention or give an adversary something to grab in a fight. The manual was about electrical systems in modern vehicles. Boring, technical, exactly the kind of thing a civilian defense contractor consultant would read while eating breakfast on a military base. It was also completely fake, purchased from an auto parts store specifically to complete her cover identity. Her real focus was on the room itself, the flow of personnel, the social dynamics, the way junior Marines gave certain tables a wide berth while clustering around others, the body language of the staff NCOs who moved through the space like sharks in familiar waters. And most importantly, the behavior of Staff Sergeant Marcus Harrison. Victoria had been watching him for 3 days. She'd memorized his patterns. He arrived at the mess hall every morning at precisely 0630 hours. He always got the same breakfast: scrambled eggs, sausage, hash browns, black coffee. He always surveyed the room before sitting down, his eyes moving across faces with an assessment that was equal parts tactical awareness and predatory evaluation. He was big, 6'3", probably 220 pounds, most of it muscle, wrapped around a frame built for violence. His Navy SEAL insignia gleamed on his uniform. He wore it like armor, like a warning, like a crown. The younger troops noticed him immediately when he entered, some with admiration, some with unease, a few with barely concealed fear. Victoria had read his service record: 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star. The kind of resume that marked a man as an elite warrior, the tip of the spear, the deadliest of the deadly. She'd also read the other file, the one that didn't appear on his official record: 3 formal reprimands that had been quietly buried, 2 incidents of insubordination that had been written off as high-performing operators bucking against bureaucracy. A pattern of behavior that suggested Marcus Harrison believed his military achievements gave him license to treat others as inferior. And he wasn't wrong to believe it. For years, the system had proven him right. His superiors had looked the other way. His peers had stayed silent. The culture had protected him because men like Marcus Harrison were valuable assets, and valuable assets were allowed certain liberties. But that protection was about to end. Victoria turned a page in her fake manual without reading it. She was here on assignment from the Defense Intelligence Agency, but that wasn't the mission she'd briefed to the base commander. Her cover story was simple and bureaucratic. She was investigating allegations of sexual harassment and hostile work environment. Routine stuff, administrative, the kind of thing that made career officers uncomfortable but didn't set off any real alarm bells. The truth was more complex and infinitely more dangerous. Master Chief William Stone, the base's senior enlisted advisor, was running a weapons trafficking operation. Over the past 18 months, he'd orchestrated the theft of $47 million worth of military weapons and equipment: M4 carbines, M249 squad automatic weapons, grenades, anti-tank rockets, even Javelin missile systems. All of it stolen from legitimate inventory transfers, smuggled off base, and sold to the Sinaloa cartel. Stone was careful, methodical. He'd built his network using legitimate transportation channels, falsified manifests, and loyal operators who either didn't ask questions or were too afraid to speak up. The weapons moved through official channels, hidden among authorized shipments, their absence masked by creative accounting and corrupted supply officers. And Marcus Harrison's SEAL team had been unwitting participants. During their last deployment to Syria, Harrison's unit had transported weapons as part of a routine logistics operation. They'd moved the crates from point A to point B, following orders, executing their mission. They had no idea that Master Chief Stone had altered the manifests, that half the weapons in those crates were destined for cartel compounds in Mexico rather than Allied forces in the Middle East. Harrison wasn't dirty, he was just exploitable. His arrogance, his sense of entitlement, his absolute confidence in his own judgment made him the perfect tool. Stone had manipulated him without Harrison ever realizing it. Victoria's mission was to gather evidence on Stone's operation while maintaining her cover as a harassment investigator. The two missions weren't as separate as they seemed. Stone's trafficking network relied on a culture of silence, on subordinates who were too intimidated to question their superiors, on a system that valued loyalty over accountability. The same culture that had allowed Marcus Harrison to abuse his authority for years. Victoria was going to dismantle both problems, but she had to be patient, had to maintain her cover, had to let the pieces fall into place naturally. She took a sip of her coffee and turned another page she wasn't reading. Across the mess hall, Marcus Harrison finished loading his tray. He moved through the space with the confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. Conversations quieted as he passed. Eyes tracked his movement. He fed on the attention, the way a fire feeds on oxygen. His path took him directly past Victoria's table. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence, just kept her eyes on the fake manual, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady. It drove him crazy. Victoria had observed this pattern for 3 days. Harrison needed to be noticed, needed to be acknowledged, needed every person in his vicinity to recognize his status, his rank, his elite credentials. When someone didn't play along, didn't give him the respect he believed he'd earned, it created a psychological itch he couldn't ignore. She was counting on it. Harrison stopped beside her table. She could feel his presence, the weight of his attention, the expectation that she would look up and acknowledge him. She turned the page instead. "Morning, miss." His voice was deep, confident, with just a hint of southern drawl. The kind of voice that expected a response, that demanded attention. Victoria looked up slowly, her green eyes meeting his with a kind of neutral expression she'd perfected over years of covert work. Not friendly, not hostile, just professional indifference. "Good morning," she said simply. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then returned her attention to the manual. The silence that followed was electric. Around the mess hall, conversations had stopped. People were watching now, sensing something unusual, something worth paying attention to. Marcus Harrison, the legendary Navy SEAL who commanded respect wherever he went, had just been casually dismissed by a woman in civilian clothes. Harrison's smile faltered, just for a moment. Victoria caught it in her peripheral vision. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. "You new to the base?" he pressed, setting his tray down on her table without invitation. The move was deliberate, an invasion of personal space, a display of dominance, the kind of power play Harrison had probably executed 1,000 times before. Victoria closed her manual slowly. She looked at the tray, then up at Harrison, her expression unchanged. "Something like that," she answered. Around them, the mess hall had gone noticeably quiet. Marines and sailors who'd witnessed Harrison's interactions before knew what was happening. This was how it always started: the approach, the assumption of welcome, the gradual establishment of control over a conversation, over a space, over a person. But Victoria wasn't responding according to the script. She wasn't flattered by his attention, wasn't intimidated by his size or his credentials, wasn't playing the role he'd assigned her. It was throwing him off balance. Harrison settled into the chair across from her without being asked. His movements were casual, confident, but Victoria could read the micro-expressions that told a different story. The slight flaring of his nostrils, the way his shoulders squared just a fraction more than necessary. He was feeling challenged, and he didn't like it. "Well, let me officially welcome you to Camp Lejeune," Harrison continued, his voice carrying just enough volume that nearby tables could hear. "This is a serious military installation, and we like to know who's sharing our space, especially civilians who seem to have unrestricted access to our facilities." There it was, the implied threat, the suggestion that her presence required his approval, his validation, his permission. Victoria picked up her coffee cup and took a measured sip before responding. "I appreciate the welcome, Staff Sergeant. I'm Victoria Kincaid, and I'm here on official business. She emphasized the word official just slightly, enough to suggest authority without explaining its source. Harrison leaned back in his chair, trying to reclaim the casual dominance his body language had lost. Official business? He repeated. That's pretty vague. What kind of official business requires a civilian to have access to a restricted military mess hall? Victoria set down her coffee cup with precise care. Her hands remained visible on the table, relaxed but ready. She'd practiced this moment in her mind a dozen times over the past 3 days. Every word, every gesture, every calculated revelation. The kind that's above your clearance level, Staff Sergeant. The words landed like a physical blow. Around the mess hall, Victoria heard the sudden intake of breath from several nearby Marines. No one spoke to Staff Sergeant Marcus Harrison like that. No one suggested that this decorated Navy SEAL, this combat veteran with 3 deployments and more classified missions than most operators would see in a lifetime, had insufficient clearance for anything. Harrison's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting casually on the table, curled slightly. Not into fists, not quite, but the movement of a man fighting to control his immediate physical response. Above my clearance level, he said slowly, his voice dropping to a register that most people would interpret as dangerous. Lady, I've been in places and done things that would give you nightmares. I've completed missions that most people will never even know happened. There's very little in this military that's above my clearance level. Victoria maintained eye contact, didn't blink, didn't flinch, just studied him with the same neutral expression she'd shown since he sat down. I'm sure you've had quite an impressive career, Staff Sergeant, she said calmly, but my work here doesn't require your involvement or approval. The mess hall had gone completely silent now. Over 1,000 military personnel had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped moving. They were watching something unprecedented unfold. Their legendary staff sergeant, the man who dominated every conversation and commanded every room, was being systematically dismantled by a civilian woman who appeared completely unaffected by his intimidation tactics. Harrison leaned forward, his considerable bulk casting a shadow across the table. His voice dropped to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper, but in the silence of the mess hall, it carried clearly. Listen here, sweetheart. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is my house. These are my troops, my base, my territory, and I don't appreciate some mystery woman walking in here acting like she owns the place. For the first time since the conversation began, Victoria's neutral mask shifted. Just slightly, just enough. Her eyes, which had been professionally indifferent, took on a quality that made Harrison's next breath catch in his throat. It wasn't anger, wasn't fear. It was the kind of cold calculation he'd only seen in the eyes of the most dangerous people he'd encountered in combat. The look of someone running tactical scenarios, assessing threats, planning responses 3 moves ahead. Your house, Victoria said quietly, each word precise as a scalpel. Your troops. That's an interesting perspective, Staff Sergeant. Harrison realized, too late, that he'd overstepped. The words had come out wrong, too possessive, too aggressive. In front of over 1,000 witnesses, he just claimed ownership of an entire military installation, like some kind of feudal lord. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not here, not now. Not in front of all these people who'd spent years looking up to him, respecting him, maybe even fearing him a little. That's right, he doubled down, his voice returning to normal volume. And in my house, we show respect to decorated veterans who've earned their place here through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Victoria stood up slowly. Harrison was surprised to realize she was taller than he'd initially thought. 5'8", maybe 5'9", with a frame that suggested serious physical conditioning. Not bulky, not obviously muscular, but the kind of lean, functional strength that came from real training, not just gym sessions. She began gathering her things with deliberate care. Each movement was precise, controlled, economical. The manual went into her bag. The coffee cup was pushed to the edge of the table for clearing. Her phone disappeared into her pocket. "Respect is earned, Staff Sergeant Harrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent mess hall. "Not demanded. And it's certainly not granted based on how loudly someone announces their credentials." The comment drew a few barely suppressed reactions from some of the younger Marines. Not quite laughter, not quite approval, but something that Harrison recognized immediately as the first crack in the wall of respect and fear he'd built around himself. He stood as well, using his considerable height advantage to loom over her. 6'3" to her 5'8", 220 to her maybe 140. The physical disparity was obvious, intentional. "You want to see credentials?" Harrison's voice carried across the now silent mess hall, making sure every person present could hear him clearly. "I've got 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and more confirmed kills than you've got years on this planet. I've fought Taliban fighters in mountains so remote they don't have names, and I've completed underwater demolition missions that push the limits of human endurance. So maybe you should think twice before dismissing what I've accomplished." Victoria finished packing her materials and looked up at him. That same unreadable expression on her face. "That's quite impressive, Staff Sergeant. Your service record speaks for itself." For a moment, Harrison felt vindicated. Finally, this woman was showing him the respect he deserved, the acknowledgement he'd earned, the deference that was his due. Then she continued speaking, and her next words detonated like a grenade in the center of his carefully constructed world. "However, your service record also includes 3 formal reprimands for conduct unbecoming, 2 incidents of insubordination, and a pattern of behavior that suggests you believe your military achievements give you license to treat others as inferior." The mess hall was now completely silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of kitchen staff who'd stopped their work to listen. Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. The information she just cited was classified, buried in personnel files that were supposed to be accessible only to his direct chain of command and specific administrative personnel. Who the hell was this woman? "How do you—" Harrison began, but Victoria cut him off smoothly. "As I mentioned, Staff Sergeant, I'm here on official business that gives me access to a great deal of information about the personnel stationed at this facility." Harrison's mind raced. DIA? FBI? Naval Criminal Investigative Service? What kind of authority did she represent? And more importantly, what was she investigating? "Now," Victoria continued, slinging her bag over her shoulder, "I believe this conversation has run its course. I have work to do, and I'm sure you have duties to attend to as well." She moved a step around him, heading toward the exit, but Harrison's confusion had curdled into something darker. His pride, his ego, his entire sense of self-worth was tied up in his image as an elite warrior. This woman, whoever she was, had just humiliated him in front of over 1,000 troops, had exposed classified information about his record, had dismissed him as casually as she might dismiss a junior enlisted Marine. He couldn't let her just walk away. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct and wounded pride, Harrison reached out and grabbed her arm. "We're not done here," he said firmly. "You don't get to drop bombshells about classified information and then just walk away." The moment his hand made contact with Victoria's arm, the atmosphere in the mess hall shifted. Every soldier present recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. Victoria looked down at Harrison's hand on her arm, then back up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the silent room. "Staff Sergeant Harrison, I'm going to give you exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from my person." There was no threat in her tone, no anger, just a simple statement of fact, delivered with the kind of calm certainty that suggested she'd already calculated what would happen next and was completely comfortable with all possible outcomes. Harrison's military training should have kicked in at this point, should have recognized the warning signs. The absolute stillness of her body, the relaxed readiness of her posture, the way her weight had shifted almost imperceptibly onto the balls of her feet. But his ego, in the audience of over 1,000 troops, prevented him from making the smart choice. "Or what?" he challenged. "You'll file a complaint? Report me to my commanding officer? Lady, I've been through more disciplinary procedures than you've had hot dinners." Victoria's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. 3. The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the mess hall, some of the more experienced senior NCOs began shifting in their seats. Their instincts, honed by years of combat and training, were screaming that they were about to witness something they'd never forget. 2. Harrison's response would become the stuff of military legend, repeated in mess halls and barracks around the world for years to come. Analyzed, debated, used as a cautionary tale about pride and consequences. Instead of releasing her arm, he tightened his grip, leaned closer to her face, made sure every person in the mess hall could see and hear him clearly. 1. Harrison made his final mistake, the one that would define the rest of his military career, the one that over 1,000 witnesses would testify to, the one that would be captured on the mess hall's security cameras from 3 different angles. He looked directly into Victoria Kincaid's eyes and spoke the 6 words that would haunt him forever. "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." Victoria's response was instantaneous. Her right hand, which had been hanging loosely at her side, moved in a blur of motion that most witnesses would later describe as almost too fast to follow. It shot upward in a perfect palm strike, the heel of her hand connecting with Harrison's jaw at exactly the right angle. Not a wild swing, not an amateur's desperate flail. A textbook strike delivered with absolute precision. The technique was flawless, the angle calculated to maximize neurological disruption, the force controlled but devastating. Harrison's head snapped back from the impact, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. His grip on her arm released immediately as his body's autonomic nervous system prioritized dealing with the blow to his head over maintaining his hold. But Victoria wasn't finished. As Harrison staggered backward, his balance compromised by the palm strike, Victoria followed through with a low sweep. Her right leg hooked behind his left knee at precisely the moment when his weight was shifting backward, when his center of gravity was most vulnerable. The 6'3", 220-pound Navy SEAL went down hard. His body hit the mess hall floor with a resounding crash that echoed through the stunned silence. The impact drove the air from his lungs. His vision blurred. His ears rang from the combined effect of the palm strike and the fall. Harrison tried to push himself back up. His pride, his training, his entire identity refused to accept what had just happened. His hands pressed against the cold linoleum, his muscles tensed to lift his body. Victoria's boot connected with his solar plexus in a controlled strike that had just enough force to achieve its purpose without causing permanent damage. The air that Harrison had just managed to suck back into his lungs exploded out again. His diaphragm spasmed. He collapsed back to the floor, gasping and wheezing like a fish out of water. The entire sequence had taken less than 4 seconds. Staff Sergeant Marcus Harrison, decorated Navy SEAL, combat veteran, the man who'd walked into the mess hall 30 minutes earlier like he owned the world, now lay on the floor, struggling to breathe. His vision was blurred. His chest felt like it was being crushed. His jaw throbbed where Victoria's palm strike had landed. Around him, over 1,000 military personnel sat in complete, stunned silence. Victoria stood over him, her breathing completely normal, her posture relaxed but ready. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no gloating, no triumph, just the same neutral professionalism she'd maintained throughout their entire conversation. "Staff Sergeant Harrison," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent mess hall. "When someone asks you to remove your hand, the appropriate response is compliance, not escalation." Harrison tried to respond, but he was still fighting to get enough air back into his lungs to speak. He rolled onto his side, coughing, his face flushed with a combination of oxygen deprivation and profound humiliation. The silence stretched on. Every person in the mess hall was processing what they just witnessed. The impossible made real. The legendary brought low. The invincible proven very, very vincible. Major Jennifer Walsh, the mess hall duty officer, was the first to break from her shock. She stood up from her table and began moving toward the confrontation, her training finally overriding her amazement. "Stand down," Major Walsh called out, though it was unclear who the order was directed toward. The fight was clearly over. Everyone remain seated and maintain order. Victoria looked up at the approaching Major and nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Major Walsh. I apologize for the disruption to your facility." Major Walsh stopped short, surprised that this woman knew her name and rank. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and understand exactly what just happened here." Victoria reached into her jacket and withdrew a leather credential wallet. She flipped it open, revealing an identification card and badge that made Major Walsh's eyes widen considerably. The Major examined the credentials carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each passing second. She looked at the ID, at the badge, back at Victoria's face, then down at Marcus Harrison, who was finally managing to get some air back into his lungs. "I see," Major Walsh said quietly, handing the credentials back. "Ma'am, I had no idea you were—" "I wasn't informed of your presence on the base." "That's quite all right, Major. My visit wasn't scheduled through normal channels." Victoria glanced down at Harrison, who had managed to push himself up into a sitting position. "I had hoped to conduct my business here without any incidents, but Staff Sergeant Harrison seemed determined to make that impossible." By this time, Harrison had recovered enough to process what was happening. The physical pain was bad enough, the difficulty breathing, the throbbing in his jaw, the bruise he could feel forming across his midsection. But the psychological impact was infinitely worse. His entire identity, his sense of self-worth, his reputation among the troops, everything that made him who he was, had been shattered in less than 4 seconds. In front of over 1,000 witnesses, by a woman he dismissed as a harmless civilian. "What the hell are you?" Harrison wheezed, looking up at Victoria with a mixture of confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. Victoria looked down at him with that same neutral expression. "I'm someone who doesn't appreciate being manhandled by overly aggressive personnel, regardless of their service record or military credentials." Major Walsh cleared her throat nervously. "Ma'am, perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. The dining facility isn't the appropriate venue for—" "Actually, Major," Victoria interrupted gently but firmly, "I think this is exactly the appropriate venue. What happened here serves as an important lesson for everyone present." She turned to address the room full of soldiers, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the mess hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is what happens when someone allows their ego to override their judgment and their respect for others. Staff Sergeant Harrison is undoubtedly a skilled and experienced military professional, but his accomplishments don't give him the right to physically intimidate or assault anyone, regardless of their gender or apparent civilian status." Harrison finally managed to get to his feet, though he was still unsteady. His uniform was disheveled, his pride was in tatters, and he was acutely aware that over 1,000 troops had just watched him get demolished by someone he'd underestimated completely. "This isn't over," Harrison said, his voice still labored. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" "Staff Sergeant Harrison," Major Walsh interrupted sharply, "I strongly advise you to stop talking and report to my office immediately for debriefing." But Harrison was beyond rational thought. The humiliation was too complete, too public, too devastating to everything he'd built his identity around. "I want to know who authorized you to be here," he demanded, ignoring his commanding officer's directive. "I want to know what agency you work for, and I want to know what gives you the right to assault a decorated military veteran." Victoria's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of something that might have been amusement. "Assault, Staff Sergeant? You grabbed me first. What I did was simply defend myself against unwanted physical contact." Every person in this room witnessed the entire sequence of events. She was absolutely right, and everyone knew it. The security cameras had recorded everything. Over 1,000 witnesses had seen Harrison initiate the physical contact. Victoria's response, while devastatingly effective, had been purely defensive in nature. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "my authorization to be here comes from significantly higher up the chain of command than anyone stationed at this facility. If you'd like to challenge that authorization, I encourage you to contact your base commander and request clarification." Harrison looked around the mess hall at the faces of the soldiers he'd commanded and impressed for so many years. Where once he'd seen respect and admiration, he now saw shock, confusion, and in some cases, barely concealed amusement. The younger troops who'd hung on his every word just minutes earlier were now whispering among themselves, stealing glances at both him and Victoria. The legend was dead. Everyone in this room knew it, and worse, everyone on this base would know it within hours. "This is impossible," Harrison said, more to himself than to anyone else. "This doesn't happen. Navy SEALs don't get—" "Navy SEALs are human beings, Staff Sergeant," Victoria said quietly. "They're highly trained, extremely capable human beings, but they're not invincible. They're not immune to mistakes or poor judgment or the consequences of their actions. And they're certainly not exempt from being held accountable when they choose to physically intimidate others." Major Walsh was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the continued attention the situation was drawing. "Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to clear the mess hall and continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting." Victoria checked her watch and picked up her bag. "Actually, Major, I think we're finished here. I have interviews scheduled this morning, and I'm already running late." She looked back at Harrison one final time. "Staff Sergeant, you'll be hearing from your chain of command shortly. I suggest you use that time to reflect on your choices." She began walking toward the exit. The sea of soldiers parted before her, creating a clear path to the door. No one spoke. No one moved to intercept her. They just watched as this mysterious woman, who'd just taken down their legendary Navy SEAL, walked calmly out of the mess hall like nothing unusual had happened. As Victoria reached the door, she paused and turned back. Her voice carried across the silent mess hall as she delivered what would become the most quoted line from the entire incident. "Remember, Staff Sergeant Harrison, being a Navy SEAL doesn't give you the right to put your hands on people who haven't given you permission to do so." And with that, she was gone. The mess hall remained in stunned silence for nearly a full minute after her departure. Harrison stood in the center of the room, his uniform wrinkled, his breathing still labored, his legendary reputation in ruins. Major Walsh approached him carefully. "Staff Sergeant, you need to come with me. Now." Harrison nodded numbly. As he followed Walsh toward the exit, he could feel every eye in the room tracking his movement, could hear the whispers starting, could sense the complete and utter destruction of everything he'd built over 15 years of military service. He'd walked into the mess hall that morning as a legend. He was walking out as a cautionary tale. And somewhere in a temporary office on the other side of the base, Victoria Kincaid was already on the phone with Colonel Jameson Hargrove, her mentor and handler. "Ghost, it's Overwatch. The distraction is in play." Hargrove's gravelly voice came back immediately. "I saw the security footage. 4 seconds. Clean technique. That palm strike was textbook." Harrison's out of the picture. Base security will be focused on the harassment investigation for the next 48 hours. That gives me the window I need. Copy that. Intel on Stone's shipment is solid. Weapons move in 72 hours. You'll have access to his supply records tonight. Victoria pulled up the file on her laptop. Master Chief William Stone's face stared back at her from the screen. 58 years old. 35 years of service. Impeccable record. And underneath it all, a trafficking operation that had stolen $47 million worth of weapons. Overwatch copies all. Beginning surveillance on primary target tonight. Harrison was just the opening move. Understood. And Vic? Hargrove paused. That SEAL never saw it coming. None of them ever do. Victoria smiled slightly. That's because they're too busy announcing their credentials to pay attention to actual threats. I'll check in at 2200 hours. She ended the call and looked out the window at Camp Lejeune spreading out before her. Somewhere out there, Master Chief Stone was moving stolen weapons, using good Marines like unwitting mules, building his criminal empire behind the shield of military service and brotherhood. He thought he was untouchable, thought his network was secure, thought a civilian woman investigating harassment complaints was no threat at all. Marcus Harrison had thought the same thing. Victoria opened her laptop and began reviewing the surveillance footage from the mess hall. She watched herself take down Harrison, studying the technique, analyzing the timing. Not out of pride or satisfaction, but out of professional necessity. Every operation had to be evaluated. Every action had to be reviewed. The takedown had been clean, efficient, exactly what the situation required. Now came the real work. Now came the hunt. Colonel James Mitchell sat behind his desk, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to a voice from the Pentagon that was systematically dismantling what he'd thought he knew about his base. Through his office window, he could see the morning sun climbing over Camp Lejeune, casting long shadows across the parade grounds where generations of Marines had trained for war. Colonel Mitchell, we need to discuss the incident that occurred in your mess hall this morning. The voice belonged to Deputy Director Lawrence Brennan, Defense Intelligence Agency. Mitchell had dealt with the DIA before, but never directly with someone at Brennan's level. That alone told him this situation was far more serious than a simple altercation between a SEAL and a civilian. Sir, I've received preliminary reports. I understand there was a physical confrontation involving Staff Sergeant Harrison and a woman claiming to be... Not claiming, Colonel. Captain Victoria Kincaid is a senior investigator with the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division. She's been conducting a covert operation at your facility for the past week. Mitchell felt his stomach drop. A covert DIA operation on his base, and he'd known nothing about it. The implications were staggering. Sir, what kind of operation are we talking about? The kind that involves $47 million in stolen military weapons, a trafficking network that spans 3 countries, and corruption that goes all the way to the Pentagon. Mitchell closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. His career, which had been tracking smoothly toward general officer rank, was suddenly looking very different. Sir, you're telling me there's a major weapons trafficking operation running through Camp Lejeune, and my command had no idea? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Colonel. And it gets worse. Master Chief William Stone, your senior enlisted advisor, is running the entire operation. The words hit Mitchell like a physical blow. William Stone had been at Camp Lejeune for 6 years. Mitchell had personally recommended him for his current position, had written glowing fitness reports, had trusted him to be the enlisted backbone of the base's leadership structure. Sir, what evidence do we have? 18 months of surveillance, intercepted communications, financial records showing unexplained deposits totaling $6.3 million in offshore accounts, and manifests that don't match actual weapons inventory. Captain Kincaid was sent to gather the final pieces of evidence we need to make the case airtight. Mitchell opened the file folder on his desk. Inside was the preliminary report on the mess hall incident. Security camera stills showed the confrontation in brutal detail. Harrison grabbing Kincaid's arm. Kincaid's devastatingly efficient response. Harrison on the floor, gasping for air. What about Staff Sergeant Harrison, sir? Is he involved in the trafficking? Unwittingly, yes. His SEAL team has been transporting stolen weapons during legitimate operations. Stone manipulated the manifests and used Harrison's team as mules. Harrison had no knowledge of it, but his arrogance and his need to be seen as the alpha made him easy to exploit. And the harassment investigation that Captain Kincaid briefed to me? Cover story. We needed a reason for a DIA investigator to be on base, conducting interviews, accessing personnel files. Sexual harassment investigations are bureaucratic enough that they don't raise immediate red flags, but they give an investigator wide latitude to ask questions and examine records. Mitchell looked at the security footage again. The woman who'd taken down a Navy SEAL in 4 seconds wasn't just some paper pusher investigating complaints. She was an operator, a trained combatant, someone who'd seen real action. Sir, what's Captain Kincaid's background? That's classified above your clearance level, Colonel. What I can tell you is that she's one of the most capable field operatives the DIA has ever produced. She's completed missions in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. Her handler is Colonel Jameson Hargrove, who you might remember from Delta Force operations in the 1980s and 90s. Mitchell did remember that name. Hargrove was a legend in special operations circles, the kind of operator whose exploits were whispered about but never officially confirmed. If Hargrove had trained Kincaid, then she was the real deal. What are my orders regarding Staff Sergeant Harrison? Administrative leave, effective immediately. All security clearances suspended. No contact with other personnel who might be involved in the investigation. And Colonel, Harrison assaulted a federal officer in front of over 1,000 witnesses. The DIA is willing to let that slide if he cooperates with the investigation into Stone's network. If he doesn't, he's looking at federal charges. Understood, sir. One more thing, Colonel. Stone cannot know that we're on to him. Captain Kincaid's cover is still intact. As far as Stone knows, she's just investigating harassment complaints. And this morning's incident was an unfortunate but unrelated altercation. We needed to stay that way for the next 72 hours. Why 72 hours? Because that's when Stone is moving his next shipment. $4 million worth of weapons from your base to a cartel compound in Sonora. If we can catch him in the act, we can dismantle the entire network in one operation. Mitchell understood. This wasn't just about arresting one corrupt Master Chief. It was about taking down an entire criminal enterprise, identifying every participant, and sending a message that this kind of corruption wouldn't be tolerated. Captain Kincaid will have my full cooperation, sir. Good. And Colonel, the next 72 hours are going to be the most important of your career. How you handle this will determine whether you make general or retire as a colonel. Don't screw it up. The line went dead. Mitchell sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he just learned. Then he picked up his phone and called his adjutant. Get me Major Walsh and find out where Staff Sergeant Harrison is right now. Across the base, in a small temporary office that had been set up for the harassment investigation, Victoria Kincaid was already 3 moves ahead. She'd anticipated Mitchell's call to the Pentagon, had known exactly how that conversation would go, had planned for it. The mess hall confrontation wasn't a mistake or an unfortunate incident. It was theater, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it established her authority. Everyone on base now knew that this civilian investigator had some kind of serious federal backing, the kind of backing that let her take down a decorated SEAL without consequences. Second, it created a distraction. Base leadership, the enlisted ranks, everyone would be focused on the scandal of Harrison's humiliation. Gossip would spread, stories would be embellished, and while everyone was talking about the SEAL who got knocked out, Victoria would be working in the shadows. Third, it sent a message to Stone, a message that said, this investigator is legitimate, she has real authority, but she's focused on harassment issues. Nothing to do with weapons or logistics or anything that would threaten his operation. Victoria pulled up the surveillance footage on her laptop. Not the mess hall cameras, different surveillance, the kind that the DIA had installed without the base's knowledge. Master Chief William Stone's office, his quarters, the warehouse where he stored weapons awaiting transfer, the loading dock where trucks came and went at odd hours. Every location had been wired with audio and video for the past month. She clicked play on the most recent footage. Stone in his office, 2 hours after the mess hall incident, on his encrypted satellite phone. Yeah, I saw the video. Seal got his ass handed to him by some DIA investigator looking into harassment complaints. Stone's voice was rough, dismissive. No, it doesn't affect us. She's looking at personnel records, interviewing people about inappropriate behavior. Completely different world from what we're doing. The voice on the other end was distorted by encryption, but Victoria's tech team had already broken it. The speaker was Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Marcus Whitmore, Stone's partner in the trafficking operation and his protection at the Pentagon level. You're sure she's not onto the weapons? I'm sure. I've got eyes on her schedule. She's interviewing junior enlisted about workplace culture. She's auditing harassment complaint files. She's doing exactly what a DIA harassment investigator would do. Nothing more. What about Harrison? He was on 3 of our transport operations. Harrison doesn't know anything. He followed orders, moved cargo, never looked inside the crates. The manifests he saw were clean, and now he's too busy dealing with the fact that a woman half his size knocked him out in front of the entire base. He's not thinking about cargo manifests right now. Good. The shipment still moves Thursday night? Thursday night, 0200 hours, same route, same procedures. 4 million in hardware heading to Sonora. Our Mexican contacts are ready. And after this shipment, we go dark for 6 months. Let this harassment investigation play out. Let it conclude. Let everyone forget about it. Then we start up again in the spring. Victoria stopped the recording and leaned back in her chair. Perfect. Stone thought he was in the clear, thought his operation was secure, thought the DIA investigator was no threat. She picked up her encrypted phone and called Hargrove. Ghost, it's Overwatch. The fish took the bait. Hargrove's voice crackled through the secure connection. I heard the recording. Stone's moving the shipment Thursday night. Affirmative. 4 million in weapons, transport to Sonora. He thinks I'm focused on harassment complaints, thinks Harrison's situation is unrelated to his operation. What's your play? Victoria pulled up a schematic of the base on her laptop. The warehouse, the loading dock, the route the trucks would take to exit the base. Every detail mapped and analyzed. I continue the harassment investigation. Make it look good. Interview witnesses about this morning's incident. Review personnel files. Act exactly like what Stone thinks I am. Meanwhile, I need access to his warehouse tonight. I need to confirm the weapons are there and get serial numbers. That's a risk. If Stone has the warehouse under surveillance, he does. I've identified 4 cameras, but I've also identified the blind spots. There's a ventilation shaft on the north side that isn't covered. I can access the warehouse from above, get what I need, and be out in 20 minutes. Hargrove was silent for a moment. Victoria could almost hear him calculating the risks, running through scenarios in his mind. This was what she loved about working with Ghost. He didn't micromanage, didn't second guess. He trained his people to be independent operators, then trusted them to do their jobs. You'll need backup, surveillance at minimum. Negative. If Stone's people see any unusual activity near that warehouse, it could spook him. I go in alone, quick and quiet, in and out before anyone knows I was there. What about Harrison? You planning to use him? Victoria had been thinking about that question since the mess hall incident. Marcus Harrison was a complication. On one hand, he was compromised, vulnerable, potentially useful. On the other hand, he was emotional, angry, and unpredictable. Not yet. He's too unstable right now. His ego is shattered. He's facing disciplinary action, and he's probably planning how to salvage his reputation. I need him focused before I bring him into the operation. You think he'll cooperate? Once he understands what Stone did to him, once he realizes he was used as a mule to traffic weapons to cartels, Harrison's got a lot of problems, but he's still a patriot. He'll cooperate. And if he doesn't, then he goes down with Stone. Federal conspiracy charges, 20 years minimum. I'll make sure he understands those are his only two options. Hargrove chuckled, a dry sound that spoke of decades watching young operators grow into their roles. You learned well, Vic. Sometimes the best way to recruit an asset is to make them choose between bad and worse. You taught me that in Istanbul. The arms dealer who thought he was untouchable until we showed him the photos of his meeting with Hezbollah. He sang like a canary for 48 hours straight, best intelligence haul of that entire operation. Hargrove paused. What time are you hitting the warehouse? 2300 hours. Security shift change happens at 22:30. Gives me a 30-minute window when the guards are still getting oriented. I'll be monitoring from here. Satellite coverage of the base, thermal imaging, the works. Anything goes sideways, I can have a DIA tactical team on site in 12 minutes. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The whole point is to stay invisible. Invisible is what you do best. Check in when you're clear. Victoria ended the call and turned her attention back to the day's cover work. She had interviews scheduled with 7 Marines who'd witnessed the mess hall incident, had to make it look legitimate, had to sell the harassment investigation story. Her first interview was at 1400 hours. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez, one of Harrison's longtime colleagues. Martinez had been in the mess hall that morning, had seen the entire confrontation. According to her personnel file, she'd served with Harrison for 8 years, including 2 deployments. Victoria reviewed Martinez's record. Solid Marine, combat experience, no disciplinary issues, multiple commendations. The kind of NCO who formed the backbone of the Corps. The knock on her door came exactly at 1400 hours. Come in. Elena Martinez entered, her uniform crisp, her bearing professional. But Victoria could read the tension in her shoulders, the wariness in her eyes. Martinez didn't know what to expect from this interview. Staff Sergeant Martinez, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Martinez sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Classic defensive posture. I want to be clear about something before we begin, Victoria said, her tone conversational. This interview is part of a routine investigation into workplace culture and professional conduct. You're not under investigation. You're not in any trouble. I'm simply gathering information about what you witnessed this morning. Some of the tension left Martinez's shoulders. Not all of it, but some. Ma'am, I saw the whole thing. Staff Sergeant Harrison approached you, you dismissed him, he grabbed your arm, and you defended yourself. It was clean, justified. Anyone who says different is lying. Victoria made a note on her pad. What's your relationship with Staff Sergeant Harrison? Martinez hesitated. This was the moment where loyalty and honesty collided, where a Marine had to choose between protecting a colleague and telling the truth. We've served together for 8 years, 2 deployments. He's a good operator, skilled, experienced, but he's got a problem with authority, especially female authority. I've seen him dismiss female officers, make inappropriate comments, use his SEAL status to intimidate people. I've called him on it before, and he just laughs it off. Has he ever been physical with anyone before this morning? Martinez looked uncomfortable. Not that I've seen directly, but I've heard stories. A female lieutenant at his last duty station filed a complaint about him cornering her after a training exercise. Nothing came of it, got buried somehow. Victoria already knew about that incident. It was in the classified file. But hearing it from Martinez added another layer of confirmation. Why do you think it got buried? Because Harrison's good at his job. Because SEALs protect their own. Because the system values operators more than it values the people they hurt. Martinez met Victoria's eyes directly. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Who are you, really? Because no harassment investigator takes down a Navy SEAL like that. No civilian contractor has that kind of training. Victoria smiled slightly. This was the risk of the cover story. Anyone with real experience could see through it. But Martinez asking the question directly gave Victoria an opportunity. I'm exactly who I said I am, a federal investigator. But my background before joining the DIA included training that most investigators don't have. Special operations? Something like that. Martinez nodded slowly. Harrison never saw it coming. You gave him every chance to back down. And when he didn't, you did what was necessary. You sound like you approve. I do. Harrison needed to learn that lesson years ago. Maybe if someone had taught it to him sooner, he wouldn't have become what he is now. Victoria leaned forward slightly. And what is he now, in your opinion? A cautionary tale. A good operator who let his ego destroy his judgment. He's got skills, got experience, got a legitimate service record. But somewhere along the way, he started believing his own hype. Started thinking being a SEAL made him better than everyone else. Made him untouchable. Do you think he can change? Martinez considered the question carefully. Maybe, if he hits rock bottom hard enough, if he's forced to confront what he's become. But it won't be easy. His entire identity is wrapped up in being the alpha, being the badass, being the guy everyone fears and respects. What if I told you Staff Sergeant Harrison's problems go deeper than harassment and inappropriate behavior? Martinez's expression sharpened. How much deeper? I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation, but let's say, hypothetically, that Harrison had been manipulated, used, made into an unwitting participant in something much more serious than workplace misconduct. You're talking about his deployment rotations. Victoria kept her expression neutral. What makes you say that? Because I know Marcus Harrison. He's an arrogant ass, but he's not a criminal. If he's involved in something serious, it's because someone smarter than him set it up. Someone who knew exactly how to exploit his weaknesses. This was exactly the opening Victoria needed. Martinez was smart, perceptive, and clearly had insights into Harrison's psychology. If that were the case, if Harrison had been manipulated into something, do you think he'd cooperate with an investigation? Depends on who was doing the manipulating. If it was someone he trusted, someone in his chain of command, someone he respected, then yeah, he'd be pissed. He'd want payback. Harrison's got a lot of faults, but he's still a Marine at his core. He still believes in duty and honor, even if he's lost sight of what those things actually mean. Victoria made another note. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Martinez. You've been very helpful. Ma'am, one more thing. Whatever you're really investigating, whatever's actually going on, Harrison's going to need someone who knows him. Someone who can get through to him when his pride gets in the way. I'm willing to help if you need it. Victoria studied Martinez carefully. This was an unexpected offer, but potentially valuable. Martinez had credibility with Harrison, had 8 years of shared history, and clearly saw through his bullshit. I'll keep that in mind. For now, this conversation stays between us. Understood? Yes, ma'am. After Martinez left, Victoria updated her operational notes. The interview had confirmed several things. First, that Harrison's pattern of misconduct was well known among his peers. Second, that he had been protected by the system for years. Third, that Martinez was perceptive enough to suspect something bigger was happening. And fourth, that when the time came to recruit Harrison as an asset, Martinez could be the key to making it work. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon conducting similar interviews. Each one added another piece to the puzzle. Each witness confirmed the same basic pattern. Harrison was skilled but arrogant, effective but abusive, respected for his combat record but feared for his temper. By 1900 hours, she'd completed 7 interviews and written detailed reports that would make her harassment investigation look completely legitimate. Anyone reviewing her work would see a thorough, professional investigation into workplace culture and professional conduct. They wouldn't see the real work happening underneath. The surveillance of Stone's operation, the preparation for Thursday night's weapons shipment, the careful construction of a case that would take down not just one corrupt master chief, but an entire trafficking network. At 2100 hours, Victoria left her office and returned to her temporary quarters. A small room in the visiting officer's quarters, clean and functional. She changed into dark clothing, black cargo pants, dark gray shirt, soft-soled tactical boots. Nothing that would stand out, but nothing that would restrict movement. She packed her gear, lock-picking tools, a small digital camera, a portable electronic device for reading RFID tags on weapons crates, night vision monocular, a compact 9mm Glock 43 with suppressor, just in case things went completely sideways. At 2200 hours, she checked in with Hargrove. Ghost, Overwatch is moving to target. Copy, Overwatch. I have satellite coverage. Thermal shows 2 guards at the warehouse, both inside the main office. Your access point on the north side is clear. Roger. Infiltration in 30 minutes. Victoria moved through the base like a shadow. She'd studied the patrol routes, the security camera positions, the blind spots. She knew exactly where to walk, when to pause, how to blend into the darkness. The warehouse sat at the edge of the base, near the vehicle depot. It was a large metal structure, probably built in the 1960s, designed to store equipment and supplies. According to the official records, it currently held surplus military equipment awaiting disposal or transfer. According to Stone's operation, it held $4 million worth of stolen weapons awaiting transport to Mexico. Victoria approached from the north, staying in the shadows of nearby buildings. The ventilation shaft Hargrove had identified was exactly where the schematic said it would be. A metal grate 2 feet by 3 feet, secured with 4 screws. She pulled out her multi-tool and went to work. The screws came out easily, suggesting they'd been removed and replaced multiple times. Interesting. Stone or his people probably used this same access point. Victoria removed the grate and slipped into the shaft. The metal was cold against her hands and knees as she crawled forward. 20 feet of narrow passage, then a vertical drop to the warehouse floor. She pulled out her night vision monocular and surveyed the interior. The warehouse was divided into sections, pallets of equipment, rows of metal shelving, and in the back corner, 20 wooden crates stamped with military shipping codes. Victoria lowered herself through the shaft using a rope she'd brought for exactly this purpose. Her boots touched concrete silently. She was inside. The guards were in the office at the front of the warehouse, just as Hargrove had said. She could hear their voices, muffled but audible. They were watching something on a phone, laughing, not paying attention to the warehouse itself. Amateur security. Stone was overconfident. Victoria moved through the shadows to the wooden crates. Each one was labeled with a shipping code and a destination. She photographed every label, every marking, every detail. Then she pulled out her RFID reader and scanned the tags. The data came through clearly. M4A1 carbines, M249 squad automatic weapons, M67 fragmentation grenades, a T4 anti-tank rockets, even 2 Javelin missile systems, enough firepower to equip a small army. And according to the serial numbers, every single weapon should have been in active inventory at Camp Lejeune, should have been in armories ready for Marine units to draw for training or deployment. Instead, they were sitting in a warehouse, waiting to be sold to the Sinaloa cartel. Victoria photographed everything: the serial numbers, the crate markings, the shipping labels, evidence that would prove beyond any doubt that these weapons had been stolen from legitimate military inventory. She was almost finished when she heard voices approaching from outside the warehouse. Not the guards, different voices. Stone's voice. Victoria's heart rate didn't change. Her breathing stayed steady. This was a complication, but not a crisis. She had options. had trained for exactly this kind of situation. She moved quickly but quietly, putting distance between herself and the crates, finding concealment behind a row of equipment pallets. Her hand moved to the Glock on her hip, ready but not drawn. The warehouse door opened. Stone entered with two other men. Victoria recognized one of them from surveillance photos. Carlos Mendez, a lieutenant in the Sinaloa cartel, Stone's primary contact on the Mexican side. The other man was unknown. Civilian clothes, expensive watch. The kind of casual confidence that suggested money and power. "The shipment's ready," Stone was saying. 20 crates, exactly as ordered. "Thursday night, 0200 hours. My trucks will transport to the border crossing at Nogales. Your people pick up from there." Mendez walked to the crates and examined them carefully. "And this is the last shipment for 6 months? That's the agreement. We go dark, let things cool down. There's a DIA investigator on base right now, but she's just looking at harassment complaints. Nothing to do with us. Still, better to be cautious." The unknown man spoke for the first time. His voice was cultured, educated, with just a hint of Boston accent. "Master Chief, you've built an impressive operation here. 18 months, 0 security breaches, 47 million in revenue. That's the kind of professionalism we appreciate." "Who the hell are you?" Stone's voice was cautious. "Let's just say I represent certain interests in Washington. Interests that appreciate the work you're doing and want to ensure it continues long-term." Victoria's blood ran cold. This wasn't just Stone and his cartel contacts. There was someone else involved. Someone from Washington. Someone with enough pull to make a Master Chief feel nervous. "I work with Whitmore at the Pentagon," Stone said. "I don't know anything about other interests." "Deputy Undersecretary Whitmore works for us, as do several other well-placed individuals in the Department of Defense. This operation is bigger than you realize, Master Chief. Your weapons are going to the cartels, yes, but they're also going to other buyers. Buyers who pay considerably more than the Mexican traffickers." Stone's expression darkened. "That wasn't the deal. I move weapons to Mendez, period. I'm not getting involved in some international arms-dealing network." The unknown man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You're already involved, Master Chief. You have been since the first shipment. We've been documenting every transaction, every manifest, every payment. If you want to walk away now, that's your choice. But the evidence of your trafficking operation will be delivered to the DIA within 24 hours. You're blackmailing me. We're offering you an opportunity. Continue the work you're already doing, expand your network slightly, and your compensation increases by a factor of 3. Or refuse and spend the next 40 years in a federal prison." Victoria's mind was racing. This changed everything. Stone's operation wasn't just about a corrupt Master Chief stealing weapons. It was part of something much larger, a network that reached into the Pentagon, into Washington, possibly into the intelligence community itself. She needed to report this to Hargrove immediately, but she couldn't move, couldn't risk being detected. Not with Stone, Mendez, and this unknown player all standing 20 feet away. Stone was silent for a long moment. Victoria could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the recognition that he was trapped. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Expand your operation. We have buyers in Syria, Yemen, Libya. They need weapons. You have access. We handle the logistics and the money. You continue doing what you do best, stealing from military inventory without getting caught." That's international arms trafficking. That's a whole different level of federal crime. Only if you get caught, and with our protection, you won't. We have people in the FBI, the DIA, even the Justice Department. We've been running operations like this for 15 years. Not once has anyone been successfully prosecuted. Victoria's camera was still recording audio from her concealed position. Every word of this conversation was being captured. Every admission, every detail. This was bigger than she'd thought. Bigger than Hargrove had thought. This wasn't just a case about stolen weapons. This was about a shadow network operating inside the U.S. government, using military resources to arm enemies around the world. Stone finally nodded. Okay, I'm in, but I want double the compensation you mentioned, and I want protection guaranteed in writing. The unknown man laughed. You'll get your money, Master Chief, but nothing goes in writing. That's not how we work. You'll just have to trust us. And if I don't trust you, then you can test your luck with the federal justice system. I'm sure a military jury will be very sympathetic to a Master Chief who stole $47 million worth of weapons and sold them to Mexican cartels. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. Details about expanded operations, new buyers, increased compensation. The unknown man provided a phone number for encrypted communication and told Stone to expect contact within the week. Then they left. Victoria waited in her concealed position for a full 5 minutes after the warehouse door closed, making sure they were really gone, making sure no one was coming back. Finally, she moved. Back to the ventilation shaft, up the rope, through the narrow passage, out into the night air of Camp Lejeune. She replaced the grate carefully, securing it with the screws, erasing any trace of her presence. Then she moved through the shadows, back across the base, back to her quarters. Once inside, she locked the door and immediately called Hargrove on the encrypted line. "Ghost, we have a problem. A big one." She downloaded the audio recording and sent it through the secure connection. Heard Hargrove's breathing change as he listened. Heard the moment when he realized what they were dealing with. Jesus Christ, Vic. This is a conspiracy that goes all the way to Washington. We need to identify the unknown man, run voice analysis, cross-reference with known persons of interest, and we need to move carefully. If this network has people in the DIA, in the FBI, we can't trust normal channels. Agreed. I'm going to kick this upstairs to the director personally. No intermediaries, no email, face-to-face briefing only. What about Thursday night's shipment? We still intercepted, but now we're not just gathering evidence on Stone. We're gathering evidence on an entire network. We need Stone alive and talking. We need him to give up everyone involved. Victoria understood. This had just become a much more complex operation. Instead of a simple takedown, they needed to flip Stone, make him cooperate, use him to identify everyone in the network from the Pentagon to the cartels to the mysterious buyers in Syria and Yemen. I'll need Harrison for this. Stone won't talk to me, but he might talk to a SEAL he's been working with, especially if Harrison is properly motivated. You think Harrison will play ball? After I show him that recording? After he understands that Stone used his team to traffic weapons to terrorists? Yeah, he'll play ball. His ego might be shattered, but he's still a patriot. And patriots don't help arm America's enemies. Bring him in, but make sure he understands the stakes. This goes wrong, we all go down. Victoria ended the call and sat in the darkness of her quarters, thinking through the next moves. She needed to recruit Marcus Harrison, needed to turn him from a liability into an asset, needed to make him understand that his humiliation in the mess hall was nothing compared to the betrayal Stone had committed. Tomorrow morning, she would make that happen. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to process what she discovered. A shadow network inside the U.S. government, running weapons to enemies around the world, protected by corruption that reached the highest levels. This was what she'd trained for, what Hargrove had prepared her for during 5 years of operations in the world's most dangerous places. This was the mission that would either make her career or end it. And somewhere on this base, Marcus Harrison was lying awake, completely unaware that his life was about to change again, completely unaware that the woman who'd knocked him out was about to offer him a choice. Help take down a criminal conspiracy that reached from Camp Lejeune to the Pentagon, or spend the next 20 years in federal prison as a co-conspirator in weapons trafficking. Victoria suspected she knew which choice he'd make, But she'd learned long ago never to assume, never to take anything for granted. Tomorrow, she'd find out exactly what Marcus Harrison was made of, beneath all the bluster and bravado. Tomorrow, the real operation would begin. Marcus Harrison sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall. His jaw still ached where Victoria Kincaid's palm strike had landed 36 hours ago. The physical pain was manageable. He'd endured far worse in combat, in training, in the brutal selection process that turned ordinary soldiers into Navy SEALs. But the psychological pain was something else entirely. He'd watched the security footage 17 times, watched himself grab her arm, watched her count down, watched himself say those 6 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life, watched her dismantle him in 4 seconds with a precision that made his SEAL hand-to-hand training look like a bar fight. The footage had gone viral within the military community. Someone had leaked it, and now every base, every unit, every operator in the special operations world had seen Navy SEAL Staff Sergeant Marcus Harrison get knocked out by a woman half his size. The memes had started within hours. "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL" was now a punchline, a warning, a cautionary tale about ego and consequences. His phone buzzed. Another message from a fellow SEAL. He didn't read it, didn't need to. He knew what it would say. Either sympathy mixed with barely concealed amusement, or outright mockery. The knock on his door was unexpected. He wasn't expecting anyone. Major Walsh had ordered him confined to quarters pending investigation. No contact with other personnel, no access to classified areas, essentially under house arrest. "Come in." The door opened. Victoria Kincaid stepped inside. Harrison stood immediately, his body tensing. The woman who'd destroyed his reputation was standing in his quarters, calm as if she were making a social call. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victoria closed the door behind her and remained near it, giving him space. Not threatening, not aggressive, just professional. "We need to talk, Staff Sergeant, and you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I don't have to listen to anything you say. You assaulted me in front of 1,000 people, destroyed my career, and now you show up in my quarters like we're going to have a friendly chat? I defended myself against your physical assault. Every witness in every camera confirms that. But you're right about one thing. I did destroy your career." Victoria paused. "The question is whether I'm going to destroy your life as well." Harrison's hands clenched into fists. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. Sit down, Staff Sergeant. What I'm about to tell you is going to make you very angry. I need you to channel that anger productively instead of doing something stupid." There was something in her tone, not the dismissive calm from the mess hall. This was different. This was the voice of someone delivering serious news. Harrison sat slowly, never taking his eyes off her. Victoria remained standing, maintaining the tactical advantage of position and mobility. "Tell me about your deployment rotations to Syria. Specifically, tell me about the logistics operations you conducted, moving supplies and equipment from base to forward operating positions." Harrison's expression darkened. "Those operations are classified. I have clearance significantly above yours. Answer the question." "We moved supplies, ammunition, weapons, medical equipment, standard logistics support for ground operations. Nothing unusual. Did you ever examine the cargo manifests closely? Did you ever verify that what you were transporting matched what was listed on the paperwork?" "Why would I? The manifest came from supply officers with proper authorization. My team's job was to provide security and transportation. We followed orders." Victoria pulled out a tablet and set it on the small table between them. She pulled up a document and turned the screen toward him. "This is a cargo manifest from your February deployment. According to this document, your team transported 40 M4 carbines, 20 M249 squad automatic weapons, and 15 cases of 5.56 ammunition from the main base to FOB Davidson." Harrison glanced at the document. "Yeah, I remember that run. What about it?" Did the cargo arrive at FOB Davidson? Of course it did. We delivered everything on the manifest. Victoria swiped to another document. This is the receiving report from FOB Davidson. They logged 30 M4 carbines, 15 M249s, and 10 cases of ammunition. 10 M4s, 5 M249s, and 5 cases of ammunition are unaccounted for. Harrison's expression shifted from defensive to confused. That's impossible. We delivered everything. I personally verified the cargo before we left and after we arrived. You verified against the manifest, but the manifest was altered before it reached FOB Davidson. The receiving officer logged what actually arrived. What actually arrived was less than what you transported. What are you saying? Victoria swiped through several more documents. Each one showed the same pattern. Discrepancies between what Harrison's team transported and what arrived at destination. Weapons and equipment disappearing between point A and point B. I'm saying you were used, Staff Sergeant Harrison. Your team transported weapons that never reached their intended destination. Someone altered the manifests, diverted the cargo, and used your reputation and your team's security to make it look legitimate. Harrison was on his feet now, his face flushed. Who? Who the hell would do that? Master Chief William Stone. The name hit Harrison like a physical blow. Stone was his senior enlisted advisor, a man with 35 years of service, someone Harrison respected, someone he trusted. That's impossible. Master Chief Stone is running a weapons trafficking operation that's stolen $47 million worth of military equipment over the past 18 months. He's been using your team and 3 other SEAL units to transport stolen weapons. You were the mules, and you never knew it. Harrison sat back down heavily. His mind was racing, processing, trying to reconcile what Victoria was telling him with what he thought he knew about Stone, about his missions, about his service. You're telling me I help traffic weapons? That I'm an accessory to? You're an unwitting participant. There's a difference. But in the eyes of federal law, that difference might not matter, unless you cooperate. Harrison looked up at her sharply. Cooperate how? Victoria pulled up another file on the tablet. This one showed financial records, bank accounts, wire transfers, millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts. Stone's not working alone. He has protection at the Pentagon level. And last night I discovered his operation is part of something much larger, an international arms trafficking network that's been operating for 15 years. She played the audio recording from the warehouse. Harrison listened to Stone's conversation with Mendez and the unknown man from Washington. Listened to them discuss expanded operations, new buyers in Syria and Yemen, weapons going to America's enemies. By the time the recording finished, Harrison's face had gone pale. Those weapons are going to terrorists, to people who've killed American soldiers, to people I've fought against. Yes. And Stone knew. He knew he was arming our enemies, and he did it anyway for money. Yes. Harrison stood and paced the small room, his hands running through his hair. Victoria watched him carefully, reading his body language, his emotional state. This was the critical moment, the point where he either broke or channeled his rage into something productive. What do you need from me? Victoria kept her expression neutral, but internally she felt a sense of satisfaction. He'd made the right choice. Stone's moving another shipment Thursday night, $4 million worth of weapons going to the Sinaloa cartel. We're going to intercept that shipment and arrest everyone involved. But we need more than just Stone. We need the entire network, the Pentagon contact, the buyers overseas, everyone. And you think I can help with that? Stone trusts you, or at least he did before the mess hall incident. If you approach him, tell him you need money, tell him you're willing to help with his operation, he might bring you in, might give us the evidence we need to identify everyone in the network. Harrison stared at her. You want me to go undercover against a Master Chief who's been trafficking weapons for 18 months? Who has connections in Washington? Who could have me killed if he suspects anything? Yes. That's insane. That's the job. And it's the only way you avoid federal prosecution for conspiracy to traffic weapons. The only way you salvage anything from your career. The only way you help take down a network that's been arming terrorists for over a decade. Harrison was silent for a long moment. Victoria could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of risks and consequences, the recognition that his life had fundamentally changed and there was no going back. If I do this, if I help you take down Stone and his network, what happens to me? Honorable discharge instead of court-martial, no federal charges, a chance to rebuild your life outside the military, and the knowledge that you help stop weapons from reaching people who kill American soldiers. And if I don't, federal conspiracy charges, 20 years minimum in a military prison, dishonorable discharge, loss of all benefits, and the rest of your life knowing you helped arm America's enemies, even if you didn't know it at the time. Harrison nodded slowly. Not much of a choice. No, it's not. He looked at her directly, really seeing her for the first time since she'd entered his quarters. Who are you? Really? Because you're not just some DIA harassment investigator. Victoria considered how much to tell him, decided that if he was going to risk his life working undercover, he deserved some truth. I'm a DIA field operative, Special Activities Division. I've conducted operations in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. The harassment investigation was cover to get me on base. My real mission was always Stone's trafficking network. And the mess hall, that was planned? The confrontation was inevitable given your behavior pattern. But yes, I anticipated it, used it to establish my credentials, and create a distraction while I gathered intelligence on Stone. So you played me from the beginning. I played the situation. You made your own choices, Staff Sergeant. You chose to grab my arm. You chose to ignore my warning. You chose to escalate to physical contact. I simply responded appropriately. Harrison couldn't argue with that. He'd watched the footage enough times to know she was right. She'd given him every opportunity to back down. He'd refused them all. What's the plan for Thursday night? Victoria pulled up a tactical map on the tablet. The warehouse, the loading dock, the route the trucks would take to exit the base. Stone's people will load the weapons at 0200 hours. 2 trucks, military cargo vehicles with legitimate manifests showing equipment transfer to a storage facility in Arizona. The trucks will exit the base through the north gate, then divert to a meeting point near the Mexican border. Where do I come in? You approach Stone tomorrow. Tell him you're facing disciplinary action because of the mess hall incident. Tell him you're worried about your career, your future. Tell him you need money. Ask if there's any way you can help with his logistics operations. He'll be suspicious. I've never asked about his logistics before. Tell him you've been thinking about it, that you remember the Syria deployments, the supply runs, that you've heard rumors about people making extra money on the side. Make it sound like you're desperate and willing to look the other way for the right price. Harrison nodded slowly. And if he brings me in, you wear a wire. You get him talking about the operation. You get names, dates, details, everything we need to build a comprehensive case against the entire network. This is dangerous. If Stone suspects I'm working with you, then I'll be monitoring everything. I'll have backup ready. If things go sideways, I can have a tactical team on your position in minutes. You mean like you had backup when you confronted me in the mess hall? Victoria smiled slightly. That was different. I knew exactly how that confrontation would end. This is more complex, more variables. But Staff Sergeant, understand something. I've run operations in hostile territory for 5 years. I've extracted assets from situations far more dangerous than this. I don't lose people I'm responsible for. Harrison studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or uncertainty. He saw only calm confidence, the same expression she'd worn when she'd counted down from 3 in the mess hall. Okay, I'll do it. But I want something in return. What? Training. After this is over, assuming we both survive, I want you to teach me what you know. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical awareness, whatever made you that good. Victoria considered the request. It was unusual, but not unreasonable. And it suggested Harrison was capable of learning from his mistakes, of recognizing superior skill when he saw it. Agreed, but you follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation, no letting your ego make decisions. You do what I tell you, when I tell you, exactly how I tell you. Yes, ma'am. The formality in his tone was new, different from the arrogant swagger he displayed in the mess hall. Victoria recognized it as the beginning of genuine respect, not based on rank or credentials, but based on demonstrated competence. We start tomorrow at 0800 hours. I'll brief you on approach strategy, verbal techniques for gaining Stone's confidence, and how to wear a wire without detection. Between now and then, you maintain your current routine. Stay in quarters. Act like you're dealing with disciplinary stress. Make it look real. Harrison nodded. One more question. Go ahead. That shot in Syria, the one that killed Stone's partner, the ISIS commander you took out, that was you? Victoria's expression didn't change. How did you know about that? I heard the recording from the warehouse. Stone's partner was killed 4 months ago. You said you've been running operations in Syria. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. The man I killed was facilitating weapons transfers to ISIS. I was conducting a counter-terrorism operation. I had no idea he was also Stone's partner in the trafficking network. But his death is what made Stone vulnerable, what made him desperate enough to expand his operation, what created the opening we needed to investigate. So in a way, you've been tracking this network since February. In a way. Harrison absorbed this information. The woman standing in his quarters wasn't just a skilled fighter. She was a hunter. Someone who'd been tracking prey across multiple countries and operations. Someone who saw patterns and connections that others missed. I'm glad you're on our side. So am I, Staff Sergeant. So am I. Victoria left his quarters as quietly as she'd arrived. Harrison sat in silence for a long time after she was gone, processing everything she'd told him. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His future was uncertain. But for the first time since the mess hall incident, he felt something other than humiliation and rage. He felt purpose. The next morning, Harrison found Master Chief Stone in his office. The Master Chief looked up when Harrison entered, his expression carefully neutral. Staff Sergeant Harrison, I heard about your situation. Unfortunate business. Harrison had rehearsed this moment with Victoria for 2 hours. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression. Master Chief, I need to talk to you. Off the record. Stone's eyes narrowed slightly. Close the door. Harrison closed the door and sat down without being invited, a small show of desperation that Victoria had coached him on. I'm facing disciplinary action, possibly a court-martial. That DIA investigator is pushing for charges. Assault on a federal officer. I could be looking at prison time. That's a tough situation. I need money, Master Chief. I need to hire a civilian lawyer. The JAG attorneys are telling me to plead guilty and hope for leniency. I need someone who actually fight for me. Stone leaned back in his chair, studying Harrison carefully. Civilian lawyers are expensive. Where are you planning to get that kind of money? This was the moment, the opening Victoria had prepared him for. I've been thinking about the Syria deployments, the logistics runs we did. I remember there were always discrepancies in the cargo counts, things that didn't quite add up. At the time, I figured it was just paperwork errors, but now I'm wondering if maybe there was more to it. Stone's expression didn't change, but Victoria, listening through the wire Harrison wore, heard the slight change in his breathing, the micro pause before he spoke. I don't know what you're talking about, Staff Sergeant. Master Chief, I'm not wired. I'm not working for anyone. I'm just a desperate operator who needs money and is willing to help with whatever logistics operations you might have running. I don't need details. I don't need to know the whole picture. I just need to know if there's a way I can help and get paid for it. Stone was silent for a long moment. Victoria held her breath, listening through her earpiece. This was the critical moment. Stone either brought Harrison in or kicked him out, either trusted him or reported him. How desperate are you? Desperate enough to have this conversation, desperate enough to ignore where the money comes from. And if I tell you there might be an opportunity, but it requires absolute discretion and loyalty, then I'm listening. Stone stood and moved to his window, looking out at the base. There's a shipment moving Thursday night, sensitive cargo. It needs security. Professional security from someone who knows how to keep his mouth shut and follow orders. What kind of cargo? The kind you don't ask questions about. The kind that pays $50,000 for one night's work. Harrison let out a low whistle. $50,000 for one night? $50,000 for absolute loyalty. For understanding that what you see and hear never gets repeated. For being willing to use force if necessary to protect the cargo. I can do that. Stone turned back to face him. This isn't a game, Harrison. The people I work with don't tolerate mistakes. Don't tolerate loose ends. You come in on this, you're all the way in. There's no backing out, no changing your mind. You understand? I understand. Thursday night, 01:30 hours. You meet me at Warehouse 7. You come alone. You tell no one. You bring your sidearm and be prepared for potential contact. Can you do that? Yes, Master Chief. Good. Now get out of my office. And Harrison, if you're lying to me, if you're working with that DIA investigator, if you're wearing a wire, I'll know, and you'll disappear. Understood? Harrison felt ice run down his spine, but he kept his expression steady. Understood, Master Chief. He left the office and walked calmly across the base back to his quarters. Only when he was inside with the door closed did he allow himself to breathe normally. Victoria was waiting for him, having entered through a back entrance. She removed the wire from his chest and checked the recording. You did well, very convincing. He threatened to kill me if I'm lying. He threatened to have you killed. Important distinction. Stone doesn't do his own wet work. But yes, he's serious, which is why we'll have backup in place Thursday night. Harrison sat down, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through his system. What happens now? Now we prepare. We have 36 hours to plan the operation, coordinate with federal assets, and make sure everything is in place to take down Stone's entire network when that shipment moves. Over the next day and a half, Victoria transformed Harrison's quarters into an operations center. Maps covered the walls, photographs of Stone's known associates, organizational charts showing the suspected network structure. She briefed him on tactical procedures, backup protocols, and emergency extraction plans, showed him how to maintain cover under stress, how to gather intelligence without appearing to do so, how to stay alive when everything went wrong. And Harrison, for the first time in years, felt like he was learning from someone who was genuinely better than him. Someone whose skills and experience made his SEAL training look basic by comparison. He'd spent years believing he was the alpha, the best, the most dangerous operator in any room. Victoria Kincaid had shattered that illusion in 4 seconds, and now she was showing him exactly how vast the gap between them really was. It was humbling, but it was also educational. On Thursday afternoon, Colonel Jameson Hargrove arrived at Camp Lejeune. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s, with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been broken and rebuilt multiple times. Harrison met him in Victoria's temporary office. Staff Sergeant Harrison, I'm Colonel Hargrove. I trained Captain Kincaid. I'll be coordinating tactical support for tonight's operation. They shook hands. Hargrove's grip was firm, his assessment of Harrison immediate and thorough. Captain Kincaid tells me you've been cooperative, that you understand the stakes. Yes, sir. Good, because tonight you're going to be in a room with armed criminals who traffic weapons to terrorists. These aren't enemy combatants following rules of war. They're murderers who kill you without hesitation if they suspect you're compromised. You need to be absolutely certain you can handle that pressure. Harrison met Hargrove's eyes directly. I can handle it, sir. Hargrove studied him for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. Despite what happened in the mess hall, you're still a trained SEAL. You've operated in hostile environments. You know how to manage fear and project confidence. Use those skills tonight. What's the tactical situation? Victoria pulled up the operational map. We have FBI and DIA assets positioned at 3 locations. Perimeter team here, here, and here. They'll maintain distance until the cargo is loaded and the transaction is complete. We need Stone and his contacts in one location with the weapons. We need clear evidence of the transaction. Then we move in. What about the buyers, the cartel representatives? They'll be there. We've identified Carlos Mendez as the primary contact. He's wanted in Mexico for multiple murders. Taking him down is a bonus. And the man from Washington, the unknown player on the recording? Hargrove's expression darkened. We're still trying to identify him. Voice analysis hasn't produced a match. But based on his knowledge and connections, we believe he's someone in the intelligence community, possibly CIA or DIA, which means we're dealing with a traitor inside our own organization. Harrison felt the weight of that revelation. If he's DIA, couldn't he know about this operation? It's possible, which is why we've kept operational details compartmented. Only the 3 of us and Director Brennan know the full scope. Everyone else has pieces, but not the complete picture. At 0100 hours, Harrison left his quarters and moved through the darkness toward Warehouse 7. He was armed with his Sig Sauer P226, 2 extra magazines, and a wire so sophisticated that it was nearly undetectable even with electronic sweeps. Victoria was positioned in an observation post 800 meters away, watching through a night vision scope. Hargrove was in a mobile command center 2 miles off base, coordinating the federal teams. Harrison approached the warehouse. The door was open. Light spilled out into the darkness. He stepped inside. Master Chief Stone stood near the crates of weapons, flanked by 4 armed men. Security contractors, former military, the kind of hard-eyed professionals who killed for money. Carlos Mendez was there as well, examining the weapons with professional interest. And standing in the shadows, watching everything with cold calculation, was the unknown man from Washington. Harrison's heart rate spiked, but he kept his expression neutral. Professional. Just another operator doing a job. Staff Sergeant Harrison, Stone said, glad you could make it. Let me introduce you to our associates. This is Carlos Mendez, representing our buyers in Mexico. And this is Mr. Blackwood, who coordinates our expanded operations. Blackwood. Victoria made a note of the name, knowing it was probably fake but worth tracking. Harrison nodded at each man. Gentlemen, Stone gestured to the crates. As you can see, we have 20 crates of premium hardware, M4S, M249S, grenades, anti-tank rockets, even 2 Javelin systems. Total value, $4 million. Your job tonight is simple. Help load these crates into the trucks, provide security during transport to the staging area, and make sure no one interferes with the operation. Understood. One of the contractors spoke up. Stone, you sure about this guy? He's the one who got knocked out by that DIA bitch. Made us all look bad. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. That investigator caught me off guard. Won't happen again. Blackwood studied Harrison carefully. Staff Sergeant, I've been doing this for 15 years. I can spot a setup from a mile away. You came to Master Chief Stone asking for money. You claim you're desperate. But how do I know you're not working for that same DIA investigator who humiliated you? This was the test. Victoria had prepared him for this exact scenario. Harrison looked Blackwood directly in the eyes. Because I hate that woman more than anything in this world. She destroyed my career, my reputation, everything I've built over 15 years. If I could put a bullet in her head and get away with it, I would. But I can't. So instead, I'm going to take Stone's money, rebuild my life somewhere else, and never think about Camp Lejeune or that DIA bitch again. The hatred in his voice was real, not directed at Victoria, but at the situation, at Stone, at the betrayal, at being used. Blackwood couldn't tell the difference. Blackwood smiled. Good. I like honesty. Let's get to work. The contractors began loading the crates onto 2 military trucks parked outside the warehouse. Harrison helped, keeping his movements natural, his attention divided between the work and his surroundings. Victoria watched through her scope, 800 meters away. Everything was going according to plan. The weapons were being loaded. The transaction was being documented. All the players were in one location. Then the complications began. A second vehicle pulled up to the warehouse, a civilian van. The side door opened, and 2 men dragged out a bound and gagged woman. Harrison recognized her immediately. Lieutenant Rebecca Donovan, 29 years old, a logistics officer who worked in Stone's supply chain. Harrison had seen her around the base but never really paid attention to her, until now. Stone walked over to the van. Lieutenant Donovan, thank you for joining us. Donovan's eyes were wide with fear, but she was trying to maintain composure. The good lieutenant here made a mistake, Stone said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She started asking questions about manifest discrepancies, started comparing shipping records to receiving reports, started noticing that weapons weren't arriving at their destinations. Blackwood approached Donovan, studying her like a scientist examining a specimen. And what did you do when you noticed these discrepancies, Lieutenant? Donovan couldn't answer through the gag, but her eyes showed defiance. She filed a report with the Inspector General, Stone answered for her. Fortunately, we have friends in that office. The report was flagged and sent to us before anyone else saw it. But now we have a problem. We have a witness, someone who knows too much. Harrison's blood ran cold. He knew what was coming next. After we finish loading, Stone continued, Lieutenant Donovan is going to take a ride with us to the staging area. And then she's going to disappear in the desert. Tragic accident. Lost during a training exercise. Body never recovered. Victoria heard every word through Harrison's wire. Her mind raced through options. If they moved in now, before the loading was complete, they might not have enough evidence to take down the entire network. But if they waited, Donovan would be in the trucks. A hostage situation in motion. Ghost, she whispered into her comm. We have a hostage complication. Female officer bound in the warehouse. They're planning to kill her after loading is complete. Hargrove's voice came back immediately. Can you get a shot? Victoria studied the warehouse through her scope. Stone was using Donovan as a human shield, keeping her close. The angle was impossible. Too many contractors in the way. Too much risk of hitting the hostage. Negative. Too many bodies. I need a better angle. Then we wait. We move when they load her into the truck. Harrison can create an opening. Harrison, listening to the conversation through his earpiece, understood. He was going to have to improvise. The contractors finished loading the last crate. Stone checked his watch. Gentlemen, we're on schedule. Load the lieutenant into truck 2. Mendez, your people are waiting at the border crossing? Everything is ready, Mendez confirmed. 2 contractors grabbed Donovan and began dragging her toward the second truck. This was the moment. Harrison had to act now or never. He moved casually toward truck 2, positioning himself between Donovan and the contractors. Master Chief, you want me riding with the cargo or with the security team? Security team, truck 1, Stone answered. Perfect. Harrison was now between Donovan and her captors, blocking their path to the truck. Copy that. Harrison turned as if heading to truck 1, then spun back suddenly. Actually, Master Chief, quick question about the route. The movement put him in perfect position. Donovan was now behind him, the contractors in front, and Harrison's body blocked the direct line of fire from Stone's position. Victoria saw the opening immediately. Harrison had just created a clear shot corridor. She could see Donovan now, partially visible behind Harrison's left shoulder. And more importantly, she could see Stone, standing 20 feet away with a pistol in his hand. She made the calculation instantly. Range, 847 yards. Wind, 9 miles per hour crosswind, gusting to 12. Target, partially obscured by Harrison's positioning, moving slightly. This was an impossible shot by any conventional standard. But Victoria Kincaid didn't operate by conventional standards. She settled her breathing, calculated the ballistics, adjusted for wind, distance, the slight movement of Stone's body. Her finger rested on the trigger. "Harrison," she whispered into the comm. "On my mark, drop flat. 3, 2, 1, execute." Harrison dropped to the ground like someone had cut his strings. Victoria's rifle spoke once. The .338 Lapua Magnum round crossed 847 yards in 1.6 seconds. The wind pushed it slightly right, exactly as Victoria had calculated. The bullet's trajectory was perfect, threading between Harrison's prone body and Donovan's crouched position. The round struck Stone's right shoulder, the impact spinning him around and dropping his pistol. Not a kill shot, Victoria had deliberately aimed for the shoulder, disabling him without killing him. They needed Stone alive. The moment Stone went down, all hell broke loose. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" FBI and DIA tactical teams breached the warehouse from 3 sides simultaneously. Flashbangs detonated, disorienting the contractors. Laser sights painted red dots across chests and heads. 2 contractors tried to resist. Victoria's rifle spoke twice more from her overwatch position. Both contractors went down with shots to the legs, disabled but alive. Harrison was already moving. He tackled the contractor nearest to Donovan, driving the man's face into the concrete with his full weight. The contractor's weapon clattered away. Mendez tried to run, made it 3 steps before a DIA agent took him down with a taser. Blackwood, the Washington insider, pulled a concealed pistol from inside his jacket, started to aim at the nearest federal agent. Victoria's 4th shot that night hit Blackwood's right hand, the bullet passing through his palm and destroying his grip on the weapon. The pistol fell. Blackwood screamed and clutched his shattered hand. The entire engagement lasted 17 seconds. When the smoke cleared, Stone was on the ground clutching his wounded shoulder. Mendez was convulsing from the taser. Blackwood was cradling his destroyed hand. 4 contractors were face down with federal agents' knees on their backs. And Rebecca Donovan was alive, freed from her bonds, shaking but unharmed. Harrison stood slowly, his ears ringing from the flashbangs, his heart pounding from the adrenaline. He just participated in a federal raid, had just helped take down a major trafficking operation, had just watched Victoria Kincaid make 4 precision shots in under 20 seconds from almost half a mile away. Victoria descended from her overwatch position, her rifle secured, her expression calm. She walked into the warehouse like she was arriving at a routine meeting. FBI agents were reading rights. DIA investigators were photographing evidence. Paramedics were treating the wounded contractors and Stone's shoulder wound. Colonel Mitchell arrived with Major Walsh, both looking shell-shocked at the scene before them. "Someone explain what just happened on my base," Mitchell demanded. Hargrove stepped forward, his credentials in hand. "Colonel Mitchell, you just witnessed the successful conclusion of a 15-month joint FBI-DIA investigation into international weapons trafficking. Your base was the distribution point for a network that's been stealing U.S. military weapons and selling them to cartels and terrorist organizations worldwide." Mitchell looked at the crates, the arrested men, the federal agents swarming his warehouse. His career flashed before his eyes. "Sir," Victoria said, approaching Mitchell, "your cooperation over the past 72 hours was invaluable. You allowed us to maintain operational security while conducting this investigation. Director Brennan specifically asked me to convey his appreciation. Mitchell understood immediately. He was being given a lifeline. Cooperate fully, support the official narrative, and his career might survive this. Of course, Mitchell said, Camp Lejeune is committed to rooting out corruption at every level. Victoria turned to Harrison, who was standing near Donovan, making sure she was okay. Staff Sergeant Harrison, you performed admirably tonight. Your actions may have saved Lieutenant Donovan's life. Harrison met her eyes, saw something there he hadn't seen before. Not just professional respect, but genuine appreciation. Just following orders, ma'am. Good orders to follow. Victoria handed him a card. Report to this address tomorrow at 0900 hours. We have a debriefing to complete. Harrison took the card, nodded. The arrest continued. Stone, Mendez, Blackwood, and the 4 contractors were loaded into federal vehicles. The evidence was cataloged. The weapons were secured. As the sun began to rise over Camp Lejeune, the warehouse was cleared. The only evidence that anything had happened was the bullet holes in the concrete where Victoria's shots had struck. 6 months later, the DIA training facility at Harvey Point, North Carolina, was hidden among pine forests and swampland, invisible to satellite surveillance and unknown to most of the military. This was where the agency trained its most elite operatives in tradecraft that couldn't be taught anywhere else. Victoria stood at the front of a classroom facing 12 new recruits. Half were male, half female. All were former military, selected for their skills, their intelligence, and their potential. Situational awareness, Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, is the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Your enemies will look for patterns, will exploit routines, will capitalize on assumptions. One of the female recruits, Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, raised her hand. She was 24, former Marine Corps, top of her class at Quantico. Ma'am, is it true you made the hostage rescue shot at Camp Lejeune, the one everyone's talking about? Victoria smiled slightly. 847 yards, crosswind, moving target, hostage proximity. But it wasn't the shot that mattered. It was everything that led up to the shot. The intelligence gathering, the asset recruitment, the tactical positioning. The shot was just the final step in a complex operation. But how did you make it? Brennan pressed. That's an impossible shot by any standard. There's no such thing as an impossible shot, Lieutenant. Only difficult calculations. Wind reading, ballistic compensation, target movement prediction, physics and training. Anyone in this room can make that shot with enough preparation and practice. In the adjacent building, Marcus Harrison was teaching hand-to-hand combat to a different group of recruits. He demonstrated a defensive technique, then had the students practice. The most dangerous opponent, Harrison told his class, is the one who doesn't announce their capabilities. The one who remains calm while you escalate. The one who gives you every opportunity to back down before they engage. He demonstrated the technique Victoria had used on him in the mess hall. The palm strike, the sweep, the follow-through. The students watched with rapt attention. I learned this the hard way, Harrison continued. I let my ego write checks my skills couldn't cash. I assumed my credentials meant I was the most dangerous person in any room. I was wrong, and that mistake cost me my career. One of the students raised his hand. But you're here now, sir. You helped take down a major trafficking operation. Doesn't that count for something? Harrison considered the question. It counts for a beginning, not a redemption. Redemption is a lifelong process. What happened at Camp Lejeune gave me a second chance. What I do with that chance is up to me. Outside, Colonel Jameson Hargrove stood on the observation deck, watching both classes through one-way glass. At 69, he should have been fully retired, maybe playing golf or writing his memoirs. Instead, he was here, watching the next generation of operators learn from the two people he was most proud of. Victoria appeared beside him, having dismissed her class for a break. "They're good," she said, nodding toward the recruits. "Better than my first class." "You're a better teacher than I was," Hargrove replied. "More patient, more willing to explain the why behind the what. I learned from the best." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Harrison demonstrate another technique. "He's changed," Hargrove observed. "The arrogance is gone. There's something real underneath now." "He earned it," Victoria said. "That wire he wore into Stone's operation took real courage. He knew if he was caught, he'd be killed. But he did it anyway. That's the kind of operator we need." "And the network? The Washington connection?" "Blackwood is cooperating. His real name is Thomas Whitaker, former CIA Deputy Director of Operations. He's given us 23 names across the intelligence community, the Pentagon, and the State Department. The DOJ is building cases against all of them." 23 traitors, Hargrove said quietly. "Makes you wonder how long this has been going on." "According to Whitaker, at least 15 years, maybe longer. They've been running weapons to enemies worldwide, using military logistics as cover. Billions of dollars, thousands of weapons, all hidden behind legitimate operations. And Stone? Cooperating in exchange for 30 years instead of life. He's given us everything: supply chains, banking networks, buyer contacts from Mexico to Syria. It'll take years to dismantle it all, but we will." Hargrove nodded. "You did good work, Vic. The kind of work that saves lives and changes the system." "We did good work," Victoria corrected. "You trained me. Harrison provided the final piece. This was a team effort." They watched as Harrison finished his demonstration, and the students began practicing in pairs. "What about you?" Hargrove asked. "You're teaching now instead of operating. That a permanent change?" Victoria smiled. "I'm training the next generation, passing on what you taught me. That's the most important operation I can run right now. But if Director Brennan needs me in the field again, I'll go. This job doesn't end. It just evolves." 40 years I served," Hargrove said softly. "Thought I'd seen it all. Then I met a 23-year-old recruit who proved me wrong. Best mistake I ever made was underestimating you, Vic. Only mistake I never repeated." Victoria looked at her mentor, this man who'd shaped her into the operator she'd become. "You didn't make a mistake, Ghost. You saw potential and developed it. That's not a mistake. That's leadership." Below them, Harrison called his class to attention. "Remember," he told them, "being the best operator doesn't mean being the strongest or the fastest or having the most confirmed kills. It means being smart enough to recognize when you're wrong, humble enough to learn from it, and dedicated enough to become better. That's the legacy we leave behind." The students dispersed. Harrison looked up at the observation deck, saw Victoria and Hargrove watching. He nodded once, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. Victoria returned the nod. "The old ways still work," Hargrove said, echoing a conversation they'd had many times over the years. "Discipline, skill, honor, those never go out of style." "No," Victoria agreed. "They don't. And as long as we keep teaching them, they never will." They stood together on the observation deck as the sun climbed higher over the training facility, watching the next generation of operators learn the skills, the discipline, and the honor that would keep America safe from enemies, foreign and domestic. The mission continued. It always would. And somewhere in a federal supermax prison, Master Chief William Stone sat in a cell, thinking about the weapons he'd trafficked, the lives he'd endangered, and the female DIA operative who'd brought his entire operation crashing down. He'd underestimated her, dismissed her as just another investigator, just another obstacle to work around. He'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. And in the end, that mistake had cost them everything. The legend of Victoria Kincaid would live on in military circles for decades. The DIA operative who'd infiltrated a trafficking network, recruited a compromised asset, made an impossible shot, and dismantled a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. But Victoria didn't think of herself as a legend. She was just an operator, doing the work, following the training, honoring the legacy that Hargrove had passed to her and that she was now passing to the next generation. Some legends deserve to fall, but the mission was eternal.